I was a duck run cowboy, you might say, because I had a little horse from the time I was, well, my first horse was a mule. And then my dad bought me a little ex-sulky racer, and she was a terrific little horse.
Fans of all ages were able to immerse themselves in the world of the King of the Cowboys at the Roy Rogers Museum, which gave the impression of being a miniature version of the Wild West that was located right around the corner. It was a popular destination for many years, and it was filled with a sense of nostalgia. It displayed a wide variety of items, ranging from shiny saddles to memorabilia that brought back fond memories of classic Western films. As a result of the fact that those doors have now permanently shut, many of us are left scratching our heads and wondering how we managed to get to this point. How did such a well-known landmark end up being destroyed? Come with me as we take a trip down memory lane and investigate the circumstances that led to the closure of the Roy Rogers Museum. Prior to delving into the reasons behind the closure of the Roy Rogers Museum, let us first investigate the history that led to its establishment and the reasons that it went on to become such a well-known location in the first place. Roy Rogers, Leonard Franklin Sly, better known by his stage name, Roy Rogers, was born on November 5, 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His parents, Maddie and Andrew "Andy" Sly, were his great-grandparents. As I was growing up in a tenement on 2nd Street, which would later become the location of Riverfront Stadium, Roy would joke that I was born at second base and that I was destined for greatness from the very beginning. Growing up, he was not the only child in the family. He had 3 sisters named Kathleen, Mary, and Cleta. Andy Sly was not a big guy when it came to his job or the city life. He detested it so much that he and his brother Will made the decision to get rid of everything and construct a houseboat that was 12 feet by 50 feet and made out of salvaged wood. Who hasn't fantasized about escaping the monotony of working from 9 to 5 and floating down a river instead? During the month of July in the year 1912, the Sly family embarked on this particular houseboat journey, which took them up the Ohio River in the direction of Portsmouth, Ohio. On the land that they had purchased, they had intended to construct a house in the future, but life had other plans for them. Following the Great Flood that occurred in 1913, the family relocated their houseboat onto dry land and continued to reside in both locations. When the Sly family made the decision to establish more permanent roots in 1919, they purchased a farm in Duck Run, which is located close to Lucasville, Ohio, approximately 12 miles north of Portsmouth. Despite the fact that they constructed a house with 6 rooms, Andy quickly came to the realization that farming would not bring them financial success. Keeping things afloat, he worked at a shoe factory in Portsmouth on a regular basis. On the weekends, Andy would visit his family, and in the traditional manner of a father, he would bring presents. He once brought a horse into the house, which was one of the most wonderful presents that young Leonard could have received because it was through riding that he learned how to ride. The fact that this was only the beginning of his journey as a cowboy was completely unknown to anyone. The Sly family had to come up with their own ways to have fun because they did not have access to modern entertainment such as radio. Square dancing was the most popular activity on Saturday nights. Leonard would entertain his neighbors by singing, playing the mandolin, and even calling out the dance moves when they came over to his house. The entertainment was traditional country music in its purest form. This was also the time when Leonard became proficient in yodeling. To communicate with one another, he and his mother would yodel across the farm, which sounds like a much more enjoyable way to do so than shouting, "Dinner is ready." In McDermott, Ohio, Leonard began his high school education. However, after 2 years, his family relocated back to Cincinnati, where Andy found a new job at a shoe factory. Leonard finished his high school education in Cincinnati. Leonard dropped out of school to work alongside his father at the factory after he became aware that the family required additional income. Even though he attended night school in an effort to keep up with his education, it is difficult to concentrate when you are working long hours and falling asleep in class. He did try to keep up with his education. As a result of being teased for dozing off during class, Leonard decided to give up on school for good. Despite the fact that it wasn't exactly a success story for staying in school, he ended up being okay. During the year 1929, Leonard's older sister Mary and her husband had moved to Lawndale, California, which appeared to be the ideal location for them to settle down. The decision was made by Leonard and Andy to leave their factory jobs, pack up their old 1923 Dodge, and travel to the west in order to pay a visit. The dream of living in California did not quite work out, and after a period of 4 months, they moved back to Ohio. On the other hand, it was only a brief period of time before the Golden State called once more. At this particular time, Leonard was given the opportunity to come back with Mary's father-in-law. In the spring of 1930, he made his decision without any hesitation, and the Sly family followed suit. After moving to Lawndale, Leonard and his father found employment as drivers of gravel trucks for a highway construction project. They settled in the vicinity of Mary. The company went bankrupt in 1931, despite the fact that life in California appeared to be heading in a positive direction. The classic problems of the Great Depression: having no job and no money. Leonard, unyielding in his determination to succeed, traveled to Tulare, California, where he found employment picking peaches for Del Monte. However, despite its lack of glamour, it was work. They managed to make it work despite the fact that he was living in a labor camp that looked like it was taken straight from the grapes of wrath. On the other hand, bigger things were waiting for Roy in California, which propelled him to stardom. Would you like to learn about the occurrence that completely altered Roy's life? Have a watchful eye. When Len, then 19 years old, went back to Lawndale, his sister Mary had a suggestion for him that would completely transform his life. It was her recommendation that he try out for a local radio program called Midnight Frolic, which is broadcast on KMCS in Inglewood. It is important to keep in mind that Len was naturally quite reserved, but Mary was the one who encouraged him to take the plunge. Consequently, a few nights later, he was wearing a Western shirt that Mary had made for him because when you have a sister who is talented, who needs designer brands and labels? When Len arrived, he was holding a guitar. Not only did he sing, but he also played the guitar and even did some yodeling. And what do you think? He did an excellent job. The Rocky Mountaineers, a country music group, extended an invitation to him to become a member of their band a few days later. For a shy guy, that's not too bad, is it? In August of 1931, Len became a member of the Rocky Mountaineers in an official capacity and immediately began working to expand the group. Therefore, he placed an advertisement in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner for a tenor who was capable of yodeling because yodeling was so popular during that time period. Following that, a Canadian named Bob Nolan responded to the advertisement. Although Nolan did not remain with the group for an extended period of time, he and Len had a strong connection and continued to communicate with one another. Tim Spencer eventually took over for Nolan, and the band continued making music together. During the spring of 1932, Len, Spencer, and another individual named Slumber Nichols came together to form a trio with the intention of giving it a shot themselves. And it was a failure. They didn't give up, even though there were times when things didn't go their way. Throughout the course of the year, Len and Spencer were constantly switching between different bands, attempting to find success with bands such as the International Cowboys and the Obero Cowboys. As soon as Spencer made the decision that he needed a break from all the hustle and bustle of the music industry, Len found himself a new gig with Jack Lefevre and his Texas Outlaws, which were a big deal on the radio in the Los Angeles area. After that, in 1933, Len, Bob Nolan, and Tim Spencer got back together and made the decision to give this whole trio thing another shot. They decided to call themselves the Pioneers Trio. This time, they were completely serious. In addition to playing the guitar, Nolan also played the string bass, and Spencer was in charge of the lead vocals. They worked on their harmonies until they were as tight as a brand new pair of cowboy boots, and throughout the rehearsal process, they worked together like crazy. During the time that Nolan and Spencer were working on writing original songs for the band, Len was juggling this project with his other radio gigs. The year 1934 was the year that things began to fall into place when they recruited Hugh Farr, a fiddle player who possessed a deep bass voice that added an entirely new dimension to their harmonies. Due to the fact that their sound was so polished after Farr was added to the mix, a radio announcer decided that they needed to upgrade their name. He renamed the group the Sons of the Pioneers because he did not believe that the Pioneers Trio was appropriate for such a young collection of musicians. And just like that, they had a name that remained in their minds. The three of them had evolved into a full-fledged band, and they were no longer merely a trio. As of the summer of 1934, these individuals were not merely the favorites of the locals. Almost immediately, their radio segments began to be syndicated all over the country, and they quickly became a phenomenon on a national scale. With the help of Decca Records, they were able to secure a recording contract, and on August 8, 1934, they recorded their initial tracks, one of which was a cover of Bob Nolan's song, Tumbling Tumbleweeds. Over the course of the subsequent 2 years, they produced a total of 32 songs, one of which was the timeless Cool Water. The Sons of the Pioneers went from being struggling trios to going on to become national stars. They were officially on the map. Not only was Roy a well-known musician, but he also had a successful career in the film industry. In addition, let's not even attempt to discuss how much of a business merchandise he was, which is why he had a museum. As time went on, he transitioned his talents from the stage to the big screen, and he eventually became a true legend in the Western film industry. The year 1935 marked the beginning of Len's career in the film industry, and boy, did he get off to a flying start. He was able to secure a consistent job in Western films, even landing a significant supporting role as a singing cowboy, all while continuing to utilize his stage name, Leonard Sly, in a Gene Autry film. Moving forward in time to 1938, Autry found himself in a bit of a financial predicament. He demanded a substantial paycheck, but the studio was unwilling to give it to him. As a result, they began their search for a new singing cowboy who would not put a strain on their finances. A large number of singers from all over the Western region, including Willie Phelps of the Phelps Brothers, were interested in taking on the role. And what do you think? Over the course of this musical battle, Len emerged victorious. It was Republic Pictures that gave him the stage name Roy Rogers, which is a combination of the catchy first name, Roy, and the famous Will Rogers last name. With this dazzling new title, Roy was offered the leading role in Under Western Stars, which catapulted him to the status of a matinee idol in a very short amount of time. Overnight, he was giving Autry a run for his money as the most popular singing cowboy in the United States of America. It was not only his films that brought him to the forefront of public attention. Additionally, he made a name for himself in supporting roles, such as in the John Wayne classic Dark Command, 1940, in which he appeared alongside George "Gabby" Hayes, who would later become his sidekick. This was an appropriate role for someone who began his career as Leonard Sly. The charisma of Roy was observed. The Motion Picture Herald's poll of the top 10 Western stars who made the most money was conducted for a period of 16 years in a row, beginning in 1939 and continuing until 1954. Every year from 1943 to 1954, he finished in first place. Between the years 1938 and 1955, he was the most successful actor in the box office poll, ranking first from 1943 to 1952. In the final 3 years, Randolph Scott was the only person who was able to defeat him. If there were awards for cowboys, Roy would have won every single one of them. He was a child's first love. As a result of his films, he became a legend among the younger audience. He stood out from the crowd because the majority of his post-war films were shot in color, whereas the majority of his Western contemporaries were still working in black and white. In some of his films, he even included comedic animal adventures, in which his dependable horse, Trigger, would go on adventures of his own. Would you be able to picture a horse with its own narrative? In Roy's little world only. When it came to matters of business, Roy was not a fool. The year 1940 was the year that he deftly negotiated a clause into his contract with Republic Pictures that granted him the rights to his name, likeness, and voice for the purpose of merchandising. Indeed, this cowboy was well versed in the art of making a profit. He introduced an entire line of Roy Rogers merchandise, which included playsets, action figures, cowboy novels, and a comic strip from the Roy Rogers magazine. Roy Rogers Comics, which was written by Gaylord Dubois and published by him, became a popular comic book series. It is safe to say that he was the second closest competitor to Walt Disney in terms of merchandise that featured his name. Mickey, please move over. While this was going on, Roy's group, the Sons of the Pioneers, which he had been instrumental in making famous, is still going strong. Roy continued to maintain his connection to the band even as they continued to perform, replacing members who had retired or passed away. It was common for them to provide him with support in films, radio shows, and television shows, even when he was not actively performing with them. Talk about a friendship that lasts a lifetime. In 1944, while they were both working on the film, destiny brought him together with Dale Evans. As a result of their outspokenness regarding their Christian faith, they became members of the Hollywood Christian Group in 1949. This organization was established by their close friend Louis Evans Jr. Billy Graham and Jane Russell were among the notable individuals who were a part of this group. By the year 1956, they had changed their name to Bel Air Church. Within the community of Apple Valley, California, where they made their home, streets and public buildings were named after them in recognition of the work they did with children who were homeless or disabled. And, as if that weren't enough, Roy was also a Shriner and a Freemason, and he was always making a contribution to the charities that they supported. Dale even composed a catchy theme song for Roy and Dale, which was called Happy Trails, and the two of them sang it together as a duet to close out their successful television show. The Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Show was a comedy Western variety show that was broadcast on ABC in the autumn of 1962. They were partners in hosting the show. It was canceled after only 3 months because it was unable to compete with the Jackie Gleason Show because it was broadcast on CBS. Unfortunately, it did not last very long. Roy was not deterred by that fact in any way. As a result of his numerous guest appearances on other popular television shows, he frequently played himself or other cowboy-type characters. One of his most memorable appearances was on Wonder Woman, in which he played a character called the Bushwhackers. Roy was the owner of a Hollywood production company that not only produced his own series, but also took on other projects, such as the CBS Western series Brave Eagle, which aired from 1955 to 1956. In this show, Keith Larson played the role of a young Cheyenne chief, which added a fresh perspective to the cowboy genre. The Marriott Corporation purchased a license to use Roy Rogers' name in 1968, and as a result, the Hot Shops restaurants were renamed Roy Rogers Restaurants shortly thereafter. Although he did not play a direct role in the operation of these businesses, it is safe to say that his name was present everywhere. In the year 1970, he triumphantly made his way back to Lubbock to be the featured performer at the Texas Tech University Intercollegiate Rodeo alongside Dale. In addition, he shot his final motion picture, Macintosh and TJ, at the 6,666 Ranch in 1975, which was located not too far from the location where he had initially begun his career. The question is, if Roy was so successful, why did he decide to close down his museum? The closure of the Roy Rogers Museum is analogous to saying goodbye to your favorite toy from your childhood, the one that you spent an excessive amount of time attempting to fix with duct tape. This museum was initially established in California because it was a well-liked tribute to the King of the Cowboys. However, it later relocated to Branson, Missouri, which is a more permanent location. Since 1957, it had been a destination of pilgrimage for devoted Roy Rogers fans, as it was filled with a treasure trove of artifacts from his illustrious career. To name just a few examples, we are discussing everything from flashy plastic saddles and carefully designed leather cowboy boots to taxidermy animals that Rogers had worked with in the past. The close relationship that he shared with his cherished horse, Trigger, is the subject of a story that is particularly moving. The fact that Rogers was unable to bear the thought of burying Trigger caused him to keep the news of his death a secret from his family for an entire year. Rather than that, he had Trigger stuffed and displayed in the museum. It was an unusual and deeply personal collection that resonated with fans of Roy Rogers. How many of us would be willing to go to such great lengths for a pet that we adore? Why then did the museum decide to shut its doors? The answer can be found in the instructions that Roy gave to his son. The museum would be subject to liquidation in the event that it ever became financially burdensome. Due to the fact that he had passed away in 1998, the family observed a decrease in attendance. The number of visitors declined from thousands to just dozens. Despite the fact that it was devastating for everyone involved, they made the decision to close their doors in 2009 due to rising operating costs and declining customer numbers. Immediately following the museum's closure, the renowned Christie's auction house held a sale of all of the items from the collection. Despite the fact that Dusty Rogers, Rogers' son, had some thoughts regarding the placement of each piece, it was not his decision. What he was most interested in learning was what would take place with Trigger. Despite the fact that the family was upset about the fact that their most treasured possessions were being distributed, they were also aware of the happiness that it would bring to fans and collectors. During the auction that took place in 2010, more than 338 items from the Rogers collection were sold out, and the bids that were placed were significantly higher than the initial estimates. One example is that the price of his first guitar was $8,750, rather than the assessed amount of $2,000. The show script sold for 5 times their original price tag, and even the signed baseball memorabilia that Rogers had signed went for more than was anticipated. Patrick Gotch, the owner of the RFD TV station, rushed to the rescue and rescued both Trigger and Bullet, his dog. A mistake made on Gotch's phone nearly caused him to miss out on the opportunity to win Trigger. During the commotion, he was unable to get his bid in, so he yelled, "Hit him! Hit him!" in an attempt to increase the amount of the bid. To this day, he continues to get emails from fans expressing their gratitude to him for rescuing the Golden Palomino. At the conclusion of the auction, there was a lot of emotion. One final rendition of Happy Trails was spontaneously performed by the audience after Dale's horse and Trigger's stunt double were sold to a private collector. Elkies, the auctioneer, referred to it as the most colorful, emotional, and sentimental sale she had ever witnessed in her 20 years of working at Christie's. For many people who were raised with Roy Rogers, the long history of the actor, the show, and everything that was associated with it was still very much alive in their hearts. The memory of the golden-tuned king of the Cowboys continues to shine brightly even in the present day, as those children are growing up and taking care of their own families. A funeral service was held for Roy Rogers on July 6, 1998, at his residence in Apple Valley, California. He was surrounded by his wife, Dale Evans, as well as other members of his family. He was 86 years old and had undergone a number of heart surgeries in his later years to treat his condition. Even though he has passed away, his legacy will continue to live on in our hearts. We will always cherish his remarkable performances, musical talents, and unwavering personality. He is remembered as the King of the Cowboys. His influence was so profound that former President Bill Clinton held a memorial service in his honor after he passed away. Clinton made the statement while she was in the Rose Garden of the White House. She said, "I really appreciate what he stood for, the films he made, and the kind of values they embodied." He went on to say that as a result of his career, there will be a great number of Americans who are both disheartened and thankful today, particularly those of my generation. He really believed in all those things, truth, kindness, and decency, and he lived his life in accordance with those beliefs to the greatest extent that a man could. Pat Brady, Roy's longtime sidekick, said this, "Roy was a giant in character, love for family, and faith," according to Gene Autry, another legend, who praised him as one of the giants of the movie industry. Autry also mentioned that Roy was a giant in the family. Remarkable individuals such as Reverend Billy Graham paid tribute to his passing by stating, "In real life, he stood taller than an icon and reached farther than the stars." As an example of the very best things that Hollywood has to offer, he will be remembered for a long time. Dusty, his son, reflected on his father's legacy by saying, "When I was a kid, I used to wonder what in the world was so exciting about this guy." Dusty was referring to his father during his childhood. "After that, I checked out all of the clippings, the fan mail, and the thousands of pictures that he had taken of everything he had accomplished. Not even close to being believable." Roy Rogers had 25 grandchildren and 33 great-grandchildren at the time of his passing. In addition, his wife and 6 of his children were still alive at the time. His legacy was carried on by his children, including Roy Rogers Jr., Linda Lou Johnson, Dodie Saylors, Cheryl Barnett, Tom Fox, and Marion Swift. Even more impressively, Roy Rogers Jr. became the curator of the museum that was named after his father. The museum was home to a number of different exhibits, including the Smithsonian and the Children's Museum. An obituary was published in the New York Times, which mentioned the museum as well as Roy's frequent visits to interact with visitors. The fact that he continued to wear his white Stetson, gabardine suits, silver and leather belts despite the fact that his legs were hurting is evidence that the King of the Cowboys never officially retired from his career. It is possible that the Roy Rogers Museum is no longer in existence. However, the legacy of Roy and Dale will continue to inspire present and future generations.